The word chilling gets thrown around a lot to describe horror and thriller movies, but never have I used that word, or never have I found that word to be as perfect of a description for a movie as I did 2024's Red Rooms. This is directed by Pascal Plante. I'd heard a lot of really good things about this movie, so I wanted to watch it before finalizing my top 10 of 2024, and it immediately shot up like pretty close to the top of my list. I absolutely love this movie. So yeah, in today's video, let's talk about the most chilling movie of 2024, Red Rooms. So if you're worried about spoilers, I am going to try to keep the first few minutes of this video spoiler free. And before I get into any major spoilers, I will put up a warning and I'll put like a little sticker up so that you guys know. So yeah, let's get into it. The idea of people paying to either torture or witness another human being tortured isn't particularly a novel idea in movies. It's been done quite a bit. I mean, obviously, we have Eli Roth's Hostel series, Fear.com, and even Videodrome kind of deals with these ideas a little bit. But the way Red Rooms approaches this topic is pretty unique in my opinion. Most of the movie is spent following Kelly Ann, played by Juliette Garipi, and she is this cold, almost lifeless fashion model and gambler who's obsessed with the criminal trial of this guy Ludovic Chevalier, and he's accused of recording and selling videos on the dark web of himself brutally torturing and murdering 3 young girls. Now, these crimes are described in excruciating detail in the opening scene of the film, which includes one long take of the opening statements of the case in a very cold and sterile feeling courtroom. We see Chevalier sitting silently in this glass box, and at the end of this opening, we get a very slow, dramatic zoom into Kelly Ann with a blank, lifeless stare on her face. It's almost 20 minutes into the film before this opening ends. I know this kind of stuff isn't for everyone and could probably be seen as boring, but for me, really, the places this movie goes are very far from boring. There's nothing more sinister and grotesque in my mind than the idea of a person paying for and finding pleasure in the pain and suffering of others. And yet, I still do consume true crime content like many other people out there. I do find it fascinating. And therein lies the heart of the film and, the ideas and themes that I saw it explore most heavily. I see Kellyanne as kind of this representation of society's obsession with true crime. And she's clearly obsessed from the beginning of the film, but she allows herself to be completely consumed by this case by the end of the movie. As the trial continues, we're introduced to another character, Clementine, and she is also completely unhealthily obsessed with this case. Clementine is what's referred to as a groupie of the accused here. No matter how much of the evidence in the case points to Chevalier's guilt, she defends him as innocent until proven guilty. Later on in the film, we see her call into a live talk show discussing the case and to kind of profess his innocence, and she's totally mocked during this TV show recording. Up until a certain point in the movie, I found myself to be pretty sympathetic to Clementine and her cause, actually. In the real world, I think we often are just too quick to judge, and it seems like, in some cases, simply being accused of something is the same as being guilty. Many are falsely accused and convicted, and that is a flaw in the judicial system, in my opinion. And, how could you not be sympathetic to those who have spent, years and years in prison for crimes that they did not commit? Kellyanne, however, does not appear to have the same concerns that Clementine does. Her motives for attending the trial are the real mystery of the film, in my opinion, and it's really what keeps the audience engaged. She appears cold and emotionless in trial and throughout most of the film, but when she finds out Clementine has no place to sleep, she invites her to stay in her apartment while the trial continues, and you kind of get to see they have this relationship that kind of blossoms for a little bit at least. Now, I think, in my opinion, if I go much further into the story, we will be getting into spoiler territory. So, before I put the warning up, I will say that I do think this film is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're interested at all in, true crime, psychological thriller type stuff, courtroom drama stuff, even. This movie is like a good, solid mix of all that stuff together. And if the subject matter at all is kind of like making you squeamish, thinking about the torture and stuff, I will say the closest thing to violence that you see in the movie is just this kind of clip of the aftermath of what happened. You never really see any actual torture happening. So if you're squeamish about that stuff, don't worry, you won't see it. You do hear a little bit of stuff. But yeah, all the violence really mostly takes place off screen. Like I said, a little bit of it is audible, but it never goes into, hostile-esque torture porn. Now that spoiler warning out of the way, let's keep going. So we see Kellyanne and Clementine continuing to follow the case, and they're even sleeping outside the courthouse to make sure that they're among the first in line to get in. So eventually we get to the point where the videos of the first two victims will be played in court for the jury. But to the surprise of Kellyanne and Clementine, everyone other than members of the victims' families and the jury are asked to leave, and they will not be permitted to view the recordings. I think this is such a smart choice by the filmmakers to keep the violence off screen and mostly just implied. Even the build up to this point, you're kind of wondering, will they show the video or won't they? It described in excruciating detail in the beginning, like I said, but it's almost like the trick they pull with Jaws, where, the longer you go without seeing the shark, the more impactful it is when you finally do. And with Red Rooms, you never even see the torture, but it's still just so impactful, even just hearing it. As Kellyanne and Clementine are kind of kicked out of the courtroom, you do kind of hear a small portion of what's happening in these recordings, as Clementine is peering in through the door as it shuts, and kind of looking through the glass. I feel like her character just needs some sort of validation. I think she really needs to see these videos, or she thinks she needs to see these videos to kind of validate her theory of Chevalier's innocence. And it's kind of much like in real life. I think some of these real life, dedicated groupies of these terrible people sometimes would need concrete evidence to have their faith shaken. So this is where we find out that Kellyanne actually has seen these videos before. Clementine begs her to show her the videos, and Kellyanne does eventually give in and finally shows her in what I think is one of the most chilling scenes in the whole movie. So we watch as Kellyanne and Clementine play these videos on Kellyanne's computer, and their faces are just drenched by this red light illuminating from her computer monitor. We kind of hear the screams and some of the tools being used in this torture. And Clementine finally is kind of coming to terms with what she's witnessing, and she breaks down and starts crying. It's like a real typical, real normal human response that you think anyone would have to watching something like this. But it's contrasted with Kellyanne's ice cold face response, as she's almost completely unaffected by the horrors, or at least it appears that she's completely affected by the horrors that she's witnessing. The camera flips at the end of the scene to show Kellyanne's computer screen, and what we see is kind of the aftermath. You just kind of see this room where the torture took place. You don't see the body, or if you do, it's kind of obscured. And it's you just see the torture just soaked in blood, and the room is totally soaked in blood. And right before the torturer turns the camera off, it freezes on it, and you kind of get a better look at his face. And he's wearing this black ski mask, but it's pretty clear that the man's eyes are Chevalier's. And it's in this moment, whether by her now more clear evidence, or maybe just, the pure shock of witnessing such a grisly, awful crime, Clementine kind of changes her point of view, and this is when I think she decides to leave. One of the most interesting things about this movie for me is how little we actually know about Kellyanne's motives. And even though, it's her perspective that we're seeing this movie through for the most part, movies for me are at their absolute peak when, when things aren't completely answered, when you're asking these questions to yourself. And I really was truly on the edge of my seat watching this, waiting to find out what her real true motives are. It's really what makes this film so great in my eyes. So now after this horrifying scene and Clementine leaving, Kellyanne's intentions, or at least her goals, finally start to be revealed. We see her communicating with others about the Red Rooms, and we find out that she is in fact trying to track down and find the recording of the third and final victim, which has yet to be located even by the authorities. So from my perspective, I began asking myself, is Kellyanne, a real psychopathic, customer of these Red Rooms? She never explained to Clementine how she acquired the videos, and it's not really clear if she enjoys them or if she is just apathetic and just so cold and robotic that she just is unaffected by watching these videos. But yeah, you're asking yourself the entire time you're watching, why is she watching these? Why is she doing this? And then comes what, in my opinion, is in fact the most chilling scene in the entire film. Kellyanne enters the courtroom for the last time wearing a blonde wig and a schoolgirl uniform, as the final victim was described earlier. She even puts in fake braces and these colored contacts to make her look as much like the victim as possible. And this is where she finally gets what I think she was looking for. Chevalier kind of looks through his glass box and he finally notices her, and he gives her a wave as she's kind of pulled out from the courtroom by security. The choice of music and the slow motion and the screaming sound effects that are playing are all just absolutely terrifying. This scene is just perfectly directed, in my opinion. After this, we see Kellyanne go through this complete whirlwind, and the pacing of the movie kind of picks up quite a bit here, actually. So she's let go from her modeling agency, and in a very tense bidding war, she uses what appears to be the last of her money, or all the money she's saved up, to buy the final video off the dark web, and she's effectively kind of gone all in to accomplish this goal, which, in the final moments of the film are finally unveiled. I'm not going to claim to totally understand what her motivations were, but you do finally find out what she's going after, or at least what I think she was going after the entire time. So after some internet sleuthing and detective work, we see Kellyanne again dressed up as the final victim, and she breaks into that victim's home in another completely bone-chilling scene. With the mother of the victim asleep, Kellyanne goes into the girl's room and begins taking selfies while she sits on her bed. So in this moment, I was thinking, this is absolute insanity, and kind of gave up all hope of Kellyanne, the main character of the movie, really being a decent human being. Why would she be doing this? It makes no sense. I think with Kellyanne's character being so robotic and lifeless and detached from humanity, I think some people probably would interpret this as, her obsession with the case and viewing the videos and going as far as to dress up like the final victim and take selfies in her house, in her bedroom. It's kind of Kellyanne's way of being able to actually feel any sort of emotion at all. On the final puzzling moments of the movie, we see Kellyanne leaving the home, but before she leaves the home, she places her USB drive memory stick at the bedside table of the victim's mother while she's asleep, and we find out that the final video was put on the USB drive, and it actually provides the final piece of evidence to prove Chevalier's guilt. Now, after this final scene, we see Kellyanne kind of disappear off into the night, and we're left with many, many questions. Why was Kellyanne doing this the whole time? Was she doing this with the purpose of, solving the case, without a reasonable doubt? Was that final video her goal all along? We don't know. But, it begs a million more questions. If that's the case, why was she in the bedroom taking selfies? Was it worth it for her to dress up like the victim, clearly traumatizing the victims' families? Did she do that purely because she needed the look and wave from Chevalier to kind of prove to herself that he was guilty all along before kind of going all in, so to speak, and spending all of her money and losing her job and all that? Like, was all that stuff worth it? There's a million more questions like that, and I think this film is really begging to be discussed. So yeah, with that said, guys, what do you think? Did you see this movie? What are your thoughts? Do you think Kellyanne had this goal of finding this video and proving Chevalier guilty all along? Um, do you think that the video did prove it without a reasonable doubt? I don't think you ever see that final video. I think the most concrete evidence you get is that close-up shot of the torturer's face behind the mask. But even that, maybe is not 100% conclusive. I think the film is saying that he is guilty. That's not really the big question. I think the bigger question really is, Kellyanne's motives, and it really is just kind of dissecting our society's obsession with true crime. There's a lot of big ideas with this movie, I think, and that's really what makes it great. So, yeah, if you guys have seen this film, let me know what you think about it. What are your answers to those questions I asked? And yeah, thanks for watching the video. I'll catch you in the next one.